In buchní giriad, Jezus dagaldachstin chachamt gadag skarch, hedrún goli gatlang, goli nerich dago orsich mottoi orden garche. Jezus orden tent ocho dagaldach tegachamt olstig beißen und schras, tunig usten deisenden berg ugach zordachtai, hiriot hotin Judas, tegatrig saimedij baila. Times. Judasen paraspulginchen bollen seminarium de toshalten door in javelsen, Romin hampt ossin burg serk, sumin harol mana chudig darolen bamber den lu, zevsig bersar t-shotschla. Jubolch gech barak, sein medij besin Jesus only dun das orgskarch ired, tet ni tossen hotzig da, tana hennigered ben, hemena sochet, ted hariuden, Natzer hat ihn Jesus gev. Jesus tegachten, tegwer, ter hunchin biben geje. Jesus sig berjuksen Judas teruit, humus in don sox spela. Tegwer, ter hunchin biben, hemen Jesus sig herechten, ted args, ochrach da gatzer und het schaaf.
When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground.
So he asked them again, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he, so if you seek me, let these men go."
This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of you, those that you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put up your sword. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?" Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people.
Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside of the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" she asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself.
Y el sumo sacerdote preguntó a Jesús acerca de sus discípulos y de su doctrina. Jesús le respondió, "Yo públicamente he hablado al mundo siempre. He enseñado en la sinagoga y en el templo, donde se reúnen todos los judíos, y nada he hablado en oculto. ¿Por qué me preguntas a mí? Pregunta a los que han oído que les haya yo hablado. He aquí, ellos saben lo que yo he dicho". Cuando Jesús hubo dicho esto, uno de los alguaciles que estaban allí le dio una bofetada diciendo, "¿Así respondes al sumo sacerdote?". Jesús le respondió, "Si he hablado mal, testifica en qué está el mal, y si bien, ¿por qué me golpeas?". Anás entonces le envió atacado a Caifás, el sumo sacerdote. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I always taught in synagogues or at the temple, where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They said to him, You aren't one of his disciples too, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, Didn't I see you with him in the garden? Peter denied it again. Immediately, a rooster crowed.
Jesus' trial before Caiaphas ended in the early hours of the morning. Then he was taken to the headquarters of the Roman governor. His accusers didn't go inside because it would defile them, and they wouldn't be allowed to celebrate the Passover. So Pilate, the governor, went out to them and asked, What is your charge against this man? We wouldn't have taken him over to you if he weren't a criminal, they retorted. Then take him away and judge him by your own law, Pilate told them. Only the Romans are permitted to execute someone, the Jewish leaders replied.
C'est ainsi que devait se réaliser la parole que Jésus avait dite pour indiquer de quelle mort il allait mourir.
This fulfilled Jesus' prediction about the way he would die.
Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again, and called Jesus and said unto him, Art thou the King of the Jews? Jesus answered him, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and the chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence.
Pilatus zei, U bent dus koning? U zegt dat ik koning ben, zei Jezus. Ik ben geboren en naar de wereld gekomen om van de waarheid te getuigen. En ieder die de waarheid is toegedaan, luistert naar wat ik zeg. Hierop zei Pilatus, maar wat is waarheid? Na deze woorden ging hij weer naar de Joden buiten. Ik heb geen schuld in hem gevonden, zei hij. Maar het is bij u gebruikelijk dat ik met Pesach iemand vrijlaat. Wilt u dat ik de koning van de Joden vrijlaat? Toen begon iedereen te schreeuwen, hem niet, maar Barabbas. Barabbas was een misdadiger.
You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? They shouted back, No, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising.
Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him in the face.
Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there,
Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him.
When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns, and the purple robe, Pilate said to them,
"Here is the man."
As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate answered,
"You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him."
The Jewish leaders insisted,
"We have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claims to be the Son of God."
When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back into the palace.
"Where do you come from?"
he asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer.
"Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?"
Jesus answered,
"You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin."
From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Arabic, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour.
But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered.
Then he delivered him over to them to be crucified. And they took Jesus and led him away.
Presero dunque Gesù, ed egli, portando la sua croce, giunse al luogo detto del Teschio, che in ebraico si chiama Golgota, dove lo crocifissero assieme ad altri due, uno di qua, l'altro di là, e Gesù nel mezzo. Pilato fece pure un'iscrizione e la pose sulla croce, e v'era scritto: Gesù il Nazareno, il re dei Giudei. Molti giudei lessero questa iscrizione perché il luogo dove Gesù fu crocifisso era vicino alla città, e l'iscrizione era in ebraico, in latino e in greco. Perciò i capi dei sacerdoti dei giudei dicevano a Pilato: non lasciare scritto il re dei giudei, ma che egli ha detto: io sono il re dei giudei. Pilato rispose: quello che ho scritto.
And he, bearing his cross, went forth unto a place called the place of a skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha.
Here they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle.
Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews."
Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written."
When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, "They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." So this is what the soldiers did.
Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene.
When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother,
"Dear woman, here is your son."
Then he said to the disciple,
"Here is your mother."
And from that hour, that disciple took her to his own home. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Now a vessel full of sour wine was sitting there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop, and put it to his mouth. So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, It is finished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit.
Since it was the preparation day, the Jews did not want the bodies to remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a special day. They requested that Pilate have the men's legs broken and that their bodies be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man and of the other one who had been crucified with him. When they came to Jesus, they did not break his legs, since they saw that he was already dead. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out.
The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies, so that you also may believe. These things happened so that scriptures would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And as another scripture says, they will look on the one they have pierced.
Later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jewish leaders. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 35 kilograms. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it, with the spices, in strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.